Welcome back to Finding the Edge podcast. I'm Garrett Boyum. Today I am joined with Zach Jungels, Jared Slater, and Rob Blanc. Rob, did I get your last name? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Honestly, everyone says it a different way. You can say blank, blanc. Honestly, I don't care.
Okay. How do you pronounce it though?
Blank, right? But then I get the, hey, does your name end with a K? Does it end with a C? Like, let's go with that. So I kind of roll with it how anyone wants to say it.
Fair enough. Well, today I wanted to bring all these guys on and talk about Square1 and its application. All these guys are Square1 practitioners. And so we've done a couple of podcasts on Square1, but today specifically, I just kind of wanted to talk about like people's practical experiences. But real quick for the new guys, we can start with, let's start with Zach. Give a little bit of background on yourself, and then we'll have Rob, you do that as well. But I wanted to start with Zach.
Let's begin. Analyzing. Finding the edge.
Sure. My name's Zach Jungels. I'm from Rochester, Minnesota. I played football, studied exercise science at St. John's University. When I was in college, I had a ton of injuries. So, every injury in the book, you name it, I had it. I had patellar tendinopathy, really, really bad back pain, herniated a disc in my lower back, tore my labrum in my right shoulder, partially torn labrum. Had to wear one of those Sullys, and my senior year I got around to playing, and after I had graduated, I felt like there was a lot left in the tank, and I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach, so I worked for my college strength and conditioning coach's company, Day One Sports Performance, where you would hire college athletes to go out to local high schools. And so I coached for about 3 high schools over the course of 4 years. And by the end of it, I was writing my own programs and programming for all these athletes. And I really, I felt like I needed a deeper understanding of how the human body worked and how it responded to training. I'd always had great success doing the triphasic type lifting. Ever since I was a freshman in high school, I had done this type of lifting. So after graduating and living at home for a little while, I started my own company where I worked with 2 different high schools. And I decided that I wanted to intern at the University of Minnesota. So that's what I've been doing for the past 2 or 3 months under Cal Dietz. And I've had a great experience interning there. And I guess how all of us got connected is through Square1. And I took a Square1 course back in April. I went out to South Dakota where I did a course with Mike Ryan and Sean. And I had a great experience. I mean, I was absolutely mind blown how well this stuff worked. And I didn't believe it. I didn't believe for 1 second that it was as good as everybody was saying it was. But people like Dan Fichter and some of these other heavy hitters in the industry really implored me to go check it out for myself. And over the course of about 8 months now, I've tested well over 100 people, and I'm very, very happy that I took the course. Not only that it was allowed me to be connected with all of you, but also from everything that I've learned about the human body, my perspective has been flipped upside down ever since taking the course. So happy to be going down the rabbit hole, and I enjoy the experience every day. Just thinking about it, parsing through some of these ideas. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, Rob, do you want to kind of give some background on yourself and then how you ended up finding Square1?
Sure. Well, obviously the Square1 story is interesting to say at least. So I'm Rob Blanc. I've worked in baseball performance for the past, 7, 8 years. Played professional baseball in the past, but I dealt with a lot of different shoulder injuries, whether it be supraspinatus tear or two labral tears and a lat tendon tear. And I kind of took a different approach, and I'm super detail oriented, so I wanted to learn everything I possibly could about pretty much everything, whether it be FRC or um, anything about anatomy and physiology in itself. And I found that I was kind of always hitting a wall and spending a lot of time wasting time on athletes doing tons of mobility, and obviously the traditional model of where you know, get gain range of motion over the course of 4 to 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, and hopefully we'll see progress. Maybe we won't. But how I got connected with Square1 is obviously through Jared over here. And honestly, I thought he was completely out of his mind. Obviously, doing an initial call with him, under the small principles, I was like, dude, there's no way this is a thing. It doesn't stick. It's not going to work. So he actually convinced me to go to a seminar in New York City back in October and I went into it thinking like this is a load of crap. Like there's no way this stuff works. I'm going to find every reason under the sun to make sure to debunk it. And obviously, I told Sean that when I was there. I was like, dude, like this isn't a thing. Like this is a lot of crap. And then obviously, when I was there, uh, I can't really describe what I was thinking because I didn't really understand what was happening, and I had to completely rethink how I think of the human movement and anatomy and physiology by itself. Just the fact that I was missing 20, 30 degrees of internal rotation in my shoulder, and it appeared in 10 minutes and it's still there 2 months later, is pretty wild. And obviously, practical application, I work with people on a pretty regular basis. I need to do a lot better job at filming before and afters because that's it. People need to see it for themselves, is they need to see how much of a difference it makes. And obviously, the community with Square1, I mean, we've got a lot of smart people in here. And obviously, I get messages on a regular basis being like, well, what do you mean we don't have to do mobility? What do you mean you don't have to do this? We don't have to spend all this time. And it kind of like turns the whole baseball development model and flips it on its head when it comes to even the skill acquisition with throwing and movement patterns. I mean, I've seen guys change their lower half in a day as opposed to weeks. I mean, it's absolutely insane. But I'm constantly going down the rabbit hole, and I still can't believe that it actually worked because it seems insane. But it's if you look at the principles of Square1, I mean, it makes a ton of sense. But you have to kind of you got to take a step back and think like, hey, well, how does the body actually function, as opposed to like looking at individual muscles and joint actions.
So do you want to kind of describe a little bit more of like your story and your experiences with it? And I think maybe first to start, like, okay, what is so groundbreaking and changing to how you see Square1 affecting the standard model of training?
Honestly, like it completely flips the standard training model on its head. Put it simply, I mean, we look at like a overhead squat assessment. Obviously, Jared has videos of when we were at the Square1 seminar doing an overhead squat, and I hadn't obviously since I had my first kid, and now I have a second kid. I don't do nearly as much training as I used to, so my movement kind of sucks. But going through a overhead squat assessment, for example, I mean, I improved it in 10 minutes to where it should be, which would usually take me weeks or months to do for somebody else. Right. So I think that as the industry looks at movement, like we're looking to hyper specific on individual joints, tendons, ligaments, fascia, etc., as opposed to what controls it all in the first place. Right. I mean, that seems like a silly question, but it makes a ton of sense when you look at it from big picture. It's like, well, if the central nervous system and the brain control everything, why are we spending so much time like manipulating fascia and like doing muscle actions? I mean, it doesn't make sense, and we wonder why it doesn't stick because the feedback isn't sticking to your central nervous system to assume that things actually are okay to do. I mean, it completely throws out like how we approach human movement, squat patterning, throwing, skill acquisition in any sport, any movement. I mean, we can fast track everything by just doing small things.
Jared, do you want to kind of jump in on kind of your experience? I know we did a whole podcast kind of dedicated to kind of your story, but any sort of experiential stuff like working with clients, athletes? What have you seen?
Yeah, so I think like what Rob is saying, it completely flips everything the traditional model talks about, especially in the baseball world where there's this huge focus on, okay, my place does it better, my place does it better, my place does it faster. It actually allows us to get in there and find the root cause of an issue. So I guess if I was going to go into some examples, I actually just worked on a guy remotely. I got a text from a pitching coach, asked me to work on one of his guys. Guy was having basically anytime he'd go to post tilt with his scap, he'd have this sharp pinching pain. I ended up working on him, found out his issue was in his low back. And all his PTs were telling him, oh, you got to work on anterior shoulder. We got to work on pec tissue quality. And it's like, that's the like PT, like physical anatomy answer is. Let's look at the actual tissue. But if there's no structural damage, so unless you've got like a completely destroyed labrum where it's hanging on by a thread, it's most likely going to fix your issue. And then there are just countless other times when I've been working on someone and, elbow pain goes away because you fix something in their knee or, it's their finger or whatever it is. But what makes Square1 just so much better is that like you can get to the actual answer of something and you're not guessing, because what you're doing is you're reading the human body. You're asking the body a question and you're saying, hey, does this bother you? If the body responds with, yes, it does bother me, now we can figure out exactly where it's coming from. If it doesn't bother you, that's great. But there's no need to do stuff now for weeks and weeks and weeks and months just to get this tiny result. There are all these videos out there, people claiming, oh, he gained, oh no, pain went away in 4 weeks doing my program. And, we gained all this mobility. And it took them 4 weeks. Meanwhile, any of us, we get that same guy in a room with an hour, he's out of pain in an hour, and he's going to be continuously out of pain. So there's no reason to just keep on just banging our heads into the wall, just spamming mobility drills or trying to do things to get the body in a position when we just ask the body if it wants to do it. And if it's something we want the body to do, we just make sure that it can do it.
Kind of to flip back over to you, Rob, what have been some of your experiences with your athletes? What have you been able to do for your athletes? How have you integrated into what you do?
Yeah, so not only from athletes, since I run health and wellness centers here in North Carolina, it gives me access to general population. And obviously with general population, you're looking at a ton of major physiological issues that people spend a decade trying to fix. One of the most ridiculous ones is actually the owner of the health and wellness centers. He had multiple spinal fusions and his neck was jacked up. I mean, he hasn't moved right in probably 30 years, plain and simple. And we did probably 2 to 3 sessions running through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of layers of different things. And he actually came back from a hunting trip down in Illinois the other day. He's like, dude, what I noticed? It's like I was actually sitting in a tree stand and I can actually turn my neck in both directions. And it was weird. It's like, I don't know what's going on. And he used to throw out his back probably once a month and walk around like he had like a stick up his ass half the time. Right. So, and the fact that he's in a situation now where his walking patterns have changed without even doing any sort of patterning with any of it. And the fact that his back is clean and opened up a range of motion that he never had for 30 years is mind blowing. I mean, this dude has done PRP injections, stem cells, like rehab for years and years and years and never got any better. But it just kind of, for his specific case, it's like cleared it up in a couple hours. It's like, well, why are we wasting decades of time doing things that don't matter? Even remote athletes, it's like we talk to remote athletes and give them an idea of like what they should be actually focusing on, seeing major changes in thoracic range of motion, major changes in movement patterns. I mean, I got guys who, obviously a guy from Minnesota Tanner Pruitt. I mean, he's a guy where like he's struggled with movement patterns since I've known him because he worked with me in my previous employer, and super smart dude. But he always dealt with like elbow pain, shoulder pain, all kinds of stuff. And I talked to him for probably 30 minutes, and it drastically changed his movement patterns, and he's not in any sort of pain. And he's actually like now he's at a situation where like he needs to be able to trust his body to like go 100 miles an hour as opposed to what he's done forever. It's like, hey, I'm going to force through RPEs just to get something out of it. I mean, it's amazing some of the results people are getting. And I have guys who do one session with me remotely and then do range of motion every once in a while or joint moves, and they're all of a sudden it's like, well, my shoulder doesn't hurt anymore. I'm not fatiguing like I used to. What's going on? It's like, why did my squat go up? Which is crazy to think about, the fact that we can manipulate performance and movement at the same time without actually having to focus on either to a degree. I mean, it's completely mind blowing. And I'm still in a situation, even 2 months later, being like, and Jared will tell you, I mean, like when I was there with the Square1, it's like, I sat there for probably a couple hours being like, dude, what have I been doing for the last decade of my life? What I learned so much, and none of it. I mean, it matters, but at the same time, it's like I can make a much bigger impact in a much shorter amount of time. And it was hilarious because talking to Sean and Jared, they're just laughing at me the entire time. But it's some of the funniest shit ever during that trip. But it's an ongoing thing. Like I will never take a different approach.
I think with Rob's version too, when he was at the course, usually things clear up. It takes a couple layers. Rob cleared up in 2 layers. I basically I threw him on the table, measured his shoulder IR, cleared 1 layer, dropped like 10 degrees, cleared the second layer, dropped like 15 degrees, and he just sits up and goes, "What did you do to me?" And he's just walking around. And I think the best part too is, I think, Rob, I'm guessing you're still trying this. Rob's still trying to make it go away. And the thing is it's just not going to go away. It's just not how it works. Like once you have it, it's there. And that's what's the best part about this. Because even, all these other things that we do, you feel better. That, like, how many times have you lifted or done mobility or gone to PT or a massage or anything, and you feel great, 2 hours later. And then all of a sudden later that night, you feel just as bad. And you're like, well, I just wasted all this money doing this. Like, this stuff sticks, and you're just not going to make it go away.
Yeah, I shit you not. To this day, I'm putting my shoulder through intense stress on a regular basis, and I can't get the range of motion to go down. I've tried everything. Like I'm doing outrageous things that my arm usually wouldn't like even lat hangs. Like I had a lat tendon tear that got repaired through a very experimental surgery. Right. I can do pull-ups like it's nothing now, which I spent 2 years trying to figure out. And all of a sudden I can actually do things. And I'm doing one arm lat hangs. And I'm like, dude, is my lat going to rip off yet? Am I going to be in pain? And it still hasn't changed, which, I mean, it makes no sense. And I think that's why, like, a lot of when people see the videos and they see the changes, they're like super skeptical because it seems too good to be true. And every person I've talked to about it, and because I've had a lot of people ask me about it and go to some seminars and do some different things. And they're like, dude, I don't know what to think anymore. And I think that's the common reaction. It's like, well, why haven't we doing this forever? Why is this not a thing? But it's an absolute mind, for lack of a better term, it's a mind fuck. It's absolutely insane.
I guess one of the questions that I've gotten is like, Rob, are your results like the norm? Or is that like, is that the norm, or what does the average person generally see as far as the results?
Honestly, like for low hanging fruit, like obviously we can clear a couple layers and see a change. Now everyone's a little bit different. Now it's very individual specific as far as like everyone's been through physical trauma, emotional trauma, like major problems. Like some will take a little bit longer, some will take a short amount of time. And I had an athlete a couple weeks ago where she had a ton of flexor pain and it went away in 3 minutes. It's like, well, is that the norm? It can be. Honestly, I've had a bunch of athletes do that, but it really depends on the person. Now, obviously, working with general population and seeing people outside of the sports world, yeah, we're dealing with a lot more problems, right? As crazy it is, like I did some stuff with one of my employees who his eye tracking was brutal. Like going side to side or up down is like all over the place. I'm like, dude, well, no wonder like you can't really walk cleanly because your nervous system taking feedback and not putting it all together. And then after probably 50 layers, he had this huge twitch in his eye and it went away. I'm like, dude, that is insane. Like, what just happened? I can't believe like what's going on right now. And it's like, dude, I can actually see clearly. Like, this is weird. Now, that's to answer your question. It's like, yeah, can it be the norm for sure? But everyone's a little bit different on how fast and how long that sticks in the short term. But obviously, uh, for the majority of people, they're going to see changes in a very short amount of time because we're just cleaning up the feedback from the nervous system to muscles, tendons, etc., to improve movement patterns. Like I don't even do any sort of patterning drills for movement anymore, really at all, because there's no really need for it if I can address the root of the problem of why something's happened in the first place. Um, but seeing is believing, honestly. Like it seems insane. It seems uh, like way too good to be true. Like if we look at the current model of like skill acquisition, motor patterning, all of it, it's like it seems like, well, why haven't we done this forever? So why isn't this a thing? Like why aren't we implementing this on a larger scale? It's because it seems too simple and people are very skeptical, just like me. It's like, no, that's no way. Like, this is a lot of crap. And obviously, I'll always be thankful for Jared for introducing me to it, and obviously showing, talking on a regular basis. I mean, it's absolutely insane. The practical applications are endless, not just in the sports world, but for every possible avenue you can think of. Chiropractic, physical therapy. We can avoid people spending decades in pain and decades going through surgeries and major interventions by just addressing the root of the problem. And obviously, I take a very similar approach when it comes to development. And people see me as like, you're completely out of your mind. So you can't individualize everything. You can't identify the root of the problem. It's like, well, what if you can? What if I gave you the tools to do so and actually make an impact?
I think with that too, kind of the like fast, having things happen fast and short. Zach, I'm sure you can speak to this as well. But a lot of times, like, because Zach, I know you work with a bunch of really high level athletes. A lot of times you'll see high level athletes have really good nervous systems. And what I mean by that is sometimes they're like hard to like find an issue with. And sometimes it takes longer because, or at least what I found in general, and now this is not a blanket statement, but in general, I found a lot of, in the baseball world, guys who throw, usually it's that like once they get over 93, they tend to be harder to trigger. They tend to be harder to find something that's going to mess up their nervous system because in order to produce that velocity, they have to move at a certain speed, and their nervous system has to fire really, really fast. And there seems to be a connection between performing the skill of a sport, whether it's sprint speed, jump height, throwing velocity. There tends to be a correlation between high neural performance and having a good nervous system. So sometimes it might take 2-3 sessions with a really high level guy to get them to feel better or get out of pain. And then you'd think it'd be the opposite. You think the guy who, is throwing slow, doesn't have a lot going for them, is going to take a while, but it tends to be the guy that doesn't perform the skill at a high level. Man, you're knocking out things one after another. Like everything's blowing them up. So it's just a weird correlation, Zach. I'm sure have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. A great example of that is my former offensive coordinator played in the NFL, and he's the only person that I was not able to trigger using eye tracking. The only person. But you think about it, that might make sense because he made his money through his eyes and through his hands, right? So it was interesting to see that he wasn't compensating through that avenue. But then we did the balance stuff with him, and every single one triggered him. And I was like, wow, this is a really unique case. But that's the cool thing about Square1 is that you're going to find that everybody's different, but the joint maps are the same, and they're consistent through every single person that you're going to test. As long as you can get a muscle test on them, you'll find that the joint maps are deadly accurate. They are so consistent through every single person I tested. And that's why I've, kind of thrown my hands up at this point, and I'm trying to tell people like, hey, this system wasn't just made up. It didn't come out of nowhere. It didn't just come out of the blue as something that somebody just made up one day. This was tested through trial and error, and it was put through the ringer before it even got out there. And so now, like, after testing so many people, I've found that, like, I kind of laugh at myself sometimes when I'm doing it, because I'm like, I'm already sort of expecting great things to happen whenever I run this system on anybody. And when you have such high expectations, sometimes you get let down when you don't get exactly what you want. And that's sort of the ego kind of gets in the way sometimes of when you expect those great results and something, you only might get 15 degrees of range of motion instead of that 30 degrees that you were looking for. But, the human body is fascinating, and the nervous system is extremely adaptable. And I think that, like Rob said, the application for this system is endless. And like I told Jared, if I find anything better one day, then I'll start using that. But until that happens, I'm going to keep rolling with this.
Well, and then too, I think I didn't mention it on the last one as much, but for me, when I look at Square1, the main thing that it's doing is it's giving the body back resources, or that's how I remember Sean talking about it. And then once I got into ecological dynamics and we start thinking about things from like the degrees of freedom problem, or rather just giving the body back degrees of freedom. So now all of a sudden the body has more resources, more ways of moving, and it has more ways to solve a problem. And so when it has more ways to solve a problem, because every situation is slightly different, then that means that now it becomes easier for you to alter your movement to fit your current situation. So for me, that's actually what's kind of going on, is we're giving the body back resources. Well, I give the body back resources, then all of a sudden, pain starts to go away. I'm starting to move better because now I have more movement options. And then, like we talked about with the nervous system too. Well, okay, now my nervous system is operating more efficiently. Therefore, I'm now able to interact with the world, and also, in some ways, now that I'm thinking about like, okay, like my muscle synergies, my ability to coordinate like different joint actions together becomes just that much better. So I kind of wanted to transition a little bit to like how you guys see what are some of the different ways that people can apply this? Because I know for a lot of people, they kind of struggle to see. I know we went and talked with some guys at a facility, and I think he understood, what the practical application of it is. But like for people who are not strength coaches, like how would like a sport coach, like a pitching coach or whatever, how would they integrate this stuff into what they're doing?
So I would start definitely for a pitching coach. So what's great about Square1 is that you don't need to have any background essentially in human movement and anatomy. Like the one learning curve is making sure like the joint actions and the planes of movement, but that's essentially it. And if all you have to remember are 6 movements, and if you can remember those 6, then you're good to go. But for like a pitching coach, for example, if you get a guy, that's struggling, let's say he goes out, say walks the first 3 guys, you call a meeting, you can go to the mound and you can, depending on how fast you are, you can, bust out like 10 or so layers, maybe at the beginning, maybe like 3 or 4, but you could, clear a bunch of stuff up, and now the guy starts throwing strikes. So now your pitching meetings aren't just about giving the guy a pep talk or, chewing him out. Your meetings are actually, hey, let's fix his nervous system. Let's see if that cleans up this issue. Or even if it's not a pitching coach, if it's, like a third base coach, you got to go tell your guy something before the at bat. Just go over there, you clear a couple layers. Now he's in the box. Now he's good to go. So the in-game application, I think, is fantastic, because if you got a guy that's struggling, or a guy that's lacking confidence, or, for example, if you're a hitter, guy throws up and in on you, back out of the way, I would be not. You don't know unless you test, but I'd be pretty confident saying you see 98 coming at your head and you get out of the way, your nervous system's probably a little bit freaked out. So, call time, their base coach goes over there, or even the hitter can reset himself, have him go out there, clear him now, instead of, being tentative at the plate, like subconsciously afraid he's going to get hit again. Now the guy's locked in, now puts a ball in the gap. There's just the in-game application of this is so huge, and that's why I can't wait for a pitching coach to take this and start applying that in game, because I think we're going to see incredible results. Now, no one's done that yet, but at least that's what I think I would apply it if I was a pitching coach.
And to kind of go off of that, the other thing is you have more time when a guy's in a dugout between innings. So to me, that's the other spot of, okay, a guy works through something, or like a pitcher comes out, all right, hey, let's just quick test you after that inning, even if it goes good. And then that way we can at least know that, all right, I feel confident and run you back out there that everything's good, or, we found a couple of things, cleared it out. Maybe that extends the outing, a couple of pitches, another batter, another inning. Or on the flip side, I think about it from the standpoint of recovery / durability. Okay, maybe now he's not going to break down in the next week or whatever. Because usually it's for most athletes, it's like one inning. One inning is where something started to kind of come off the rails just a little bit. My bicep tendonitis started to kind of flare in one inning, right? And if you're able to get in there and kind of clear that out, and all of a sudden that goes away, now all of a sudden now that's not building. And so to me, it's not just about the extending the longevity within a game. It's about the course of a season, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of bridge off of that is, I look at it from my personal experience. Is I was an athlete early on in my college career, where I was very external driven in the first place. I just, hey, let's just throw, right? There was no issues. I would just get up there and whip it, right? And I never had any problems when it comes to performance. There was no such thing as, I didn't have performance anxiety at that time. After I got hurt, and trying to reinvent who I was as far as movement patterns are concerned, and command kind of fell apart, and issues. I spent the better part of 4+ years struggling. Now, and the thing that people need to understand about Square1, it's not just specific to what we can look at. It's like there's a huge emotional and psychological part to this, where we can help guys get back on track without just like trying to give them a therapy session or pep talk, right? It's the applications are endless on getting guys to feel better. I mean, I did this with one of my employees, and like she would had this huge like thing where like if someone touched her hair, like she'd fucking freak out, right? And just went through a couple hairs, and all of a sudden I had some random person come up behind her and like, touch her hair, and nothing happened. Didn't forget. I'm like, well, there's a psychological part to that, and obviously you can trigger people in a lot of different ways. Even think about, hey, the moment where you got hurt, if we don't clear that emotional trauma and emotional trigger, it's like, how do we expect it to actually change long term? Even for me, like when it comes to command, it's like, dude, if I threw ball one, I was screwed. It's like, oh, ball two, ball three, ball four, I'm going to get yanked. But if I could reset myself or find a way to have the coach work with me, and I think that goes off Jared's point, is this sports performance coaches or actual coaches in the field or in the dugout, etc., they can fast track guys' performance where we don't have these complete meltdowns, right? I talk about, like, I've worked with athletes forever. You know how many therapy sessions I've dealt with that could be prevented by just kind of giving them tools to kind of restructure themselves? I mean, it's the practical application for that is endless. It's not even from the sports world. We're talking about anything, like emotional trauma in general. Like, I had this lady who had a huge like surfing accident, and she ended up separating her shoulder. And just thinking about that accident triggered her like 10 times, and it took a while to get it taken care of. And all of a sudden, she can move her neck. I'm like, well, that's odd. It might not be just a specific to physiology. I mean, there's a lot of emotional stuff that can be held. Like then you look into the like the realm of like yoga and holding energy in specific places. Like I mean, it's really not that far off. To be honest with you, yeah. Do I see that as like that's all much for me? But realistically, there's a huge piece to it. They obviously don't have the whole picture, but I think there's a huge application to that specifically, and we can alleviate a lot of these problems for athletes. I'm thinking about the ROI you could have on a college athlete or professional athlete if you can take the performance anxiety part and throw it out the window.
And
Go ahead.
I mean, and the best part is too, Rob's a baseball performance coach. He's not a psychologist. He's not a, like all you, that's what's so good about this is that you don't need to have this label on you as, oh, I'm this. It's, you now have access to kind of fix the human as a whole. There's no, oh, we're fixing the shoulder pain. It's like, okay, just because, and Sean would joke about this, like, oh, you're a baseball performance coach and you're fixing, regular people with their pain. It's like, I'm not a PT and I'm not doing anything that would legally get me in trouble. I'm not diagnosing you. I'm just reading your nervous system. And I think that's what's so cool is you don't have to be a psychologist, a PT, a chiro. All you need to do is just read the body and that's it.
Well, and then to your point on the emotional side of things, I was reading something about how, like, sometimes why is it that we have pain with something that we've been doing a ton of? For example, the one that they used was like, you don't just get carpal tunnel from overuse necessarily. I mean, you can for sure, but if you've been doing it, you've been working at the computer a ton and like your work level is about the same, and all of a sudden you develop carpal tunnel. Well, that might not be because of what you've been doing. It actually could be because of the stress, outside stress, or like, some sort of emotional experience that you're going through could be causing and triggering that and making your body susceptible to that sort of response. And so I think to me, that's where like the emotional side of things is kind of one that we really take for granted how that affects the body. And then having a system that can help address that. I don't think it's the end all be all. Like we still have to give people strategies for, like you still have to have some sort of mental strategies to how to handle some sort of failure. And I think that's like when in one case that Zach and I worked with a kid who had like kind of I want to say, I don't remember if it was like a UCL strain or what he had going on. And, we did Zach, how many sessions did we do with Joey?
Do you
remember?
Two. I think
it was like two or three, right?
Yeah, it was two hour-long set, 2 hour-long sessions. I think one might have been like an hour and a half. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
and then we did that outside and all that sort of stuff. Yep. And some of the things with him, like kind of his story, was that he kind of would struggle with command, all this sort of stuff. He was struggling too with like the fact that he wasn't back up to his old velo, all that sort of stuff. And he would have some sort of zings every now and then in his elbow. And actually what I think it was at the end of the day was like his nerve was getting pissed off when he was throwing. And so it'd zing him every now and then. But I talked to him a lot about his mental state and improving his mental state, because he was getting really discouraged with the fact that he wasn't making progress as fast as he wanted, all that sort of stuff. I mean, we were also running up to the fact that like, okay, it's a sophomore year at junior college, and he needs to perform for the coaches, and like he hadn't even been off the mound only like one time before we started the fall, right? And so like, just having to talk him through that, and also just like getting him, like telling him like, look, man, these struggles are going to, like, you're going to have to face some things like psychologically, and you working through that is only going to make you stronger. And so having him work through that and watching like him get into a better mental state, all of a sudden at the end, like he's feeling really good and he's back up to his old velocity. And so I think we have to also like put that caveat in there. Like, I think this is the thing that Jared, you've talked about, is like Square1 is kind of the foundation. It sets us up to be able to actually work on these other things. It doesn't replace doing some of these other things. It doesn't replace your strength training. It doesn't replace your, like, you having to work on working through like mental emotional stuff, but it helps make your body and your nervous system more resilient to those things, so that now you can actually work on just that actual stuff that you need to work on, instead of, okay, now it's having this cascade effect on you. So to me, that's the real strength and power of Square1, is that it really, now you're not digging a hole necessarily. Now you can actually start filling it in and building on top of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're good.
I was going to say it's like doing a supercharger on a car. I still have to push the gas. I still have to steer it. It's just going to go faster now. Like that, you still have to do everything you've been doing, but now it just happens faster.
Yeah, I mean, practically, I'm a perfect example. It's like I've had a lot of major injuries, and I can think about my progress during each one of those, especially with my labrum, of working up to 80, 90, 100% and popping scar tissue, and then taking a huge regression for a long period of time. It's like, oh shit, is my shoulder jacked up? When in reality, I'm creating a scenario for myself that I can't do something. When in reality, physiologically, I can do it, but then I get to a situation where I'm taking 10 steps back developmentally. As far as my approach is concerned, it's like the same guy with any guy. I mean, think of any guy who's going back through rehab or had a traumatic injury. There's a huge characteristic when it comes to feel. It's like, hey, if I'm trying to gain full elbow extension back with Tommy John guys, like they're like, do I really want to go into full extension? Do I really trust my arm to kind of unwind into release? Is that comfortable? Is it going to hurt? I mean, that's a huge component of the rehab process. And obviously, I'm very specific in the past with working with rehab guys. Like, well, we can fast track a lot of these guys' progressions with taking 10 times less time. So why does the rehab progress have to be months and months and months and months when I can open up range of motion faster and get them back to doing what they love to do in the first place? And I think that's something that where a lot of the industry is capped by, like, well, physical therapists, developmental parents from orthopedists. I mean, they're very conservative in nature, right? So we don't have to take such a conservative approach if we can kind of train the nervous system to understand, like, hey, it's okay to work through this range of motion and put stress to this joint because it's healed. I mean, it's structure sound. We're not getting the same feedback. And we talk about like proprioception and all this other stuff. It's like we're just cleaning up pathways and giving the guys the tools to actually move how they want to move, how they used to move, without having to create this massive intervention and reinvent who they are. It's like authenticity. We all move specifically. We're all compensators at all different times. So if we can embrace the authentic movement of somebody and allow them the tools to roll with it. And that's where you look at mechanics when it comes to throwing. It's like, we don't have to put guys in boxes. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, you see some of the hardest throws in the earth. Yeah, are there characteristics of throwing patterns that are advantageous to velocity? Yeah, for sure. But it's on a spectrum. It's like, it doesn't have to be perfect. But at the same time, as an industry for baseball specifically, it's like we're trying to put guys into positions exclusively, and whether or not their body will respond to it or not. And we're actually fighting against ourselves by like overloading the feedback loops. Like, oh, we need to do this, 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 and this. Like, well, we don't have to cap movement. It's like the same way I look at like abbreviated arm action drills. Like, well, the arm gets up into flip up as a byproduct of everything else. So why are we spending so much time staying in this position when we can actually streamline it sooner?
And two things. So to that point too, like thinking about like late arm is such this, it's just like this very taboo subject in baseball where it's like, oh, like, and it's like all late arm is, if you know Square1, is it's just a neurological gap. Like that's all it is. Timing is 100% neurological because every late arm is a timing issue because something's not working at the right time. And if something's timing, what is the result of that? It's signals being sent from the brain to the body. That's all it is. And so if we can fix the brain's communication, it fixes the timing issue. And then with Zach, I know we're kind of talking about mechanics. I'm talking about more sprint mechanics. You and I were messing around with some things we can't really talk about, but we were messing around with some things and basically talking about, okay, how do we get to terminal swing? And we're basically going into full knee extension. And Zach, you're probably missing just static, probably like 20 degrees or something. We ran through a couple things and basically a full knee extension. And Zach, when you told me this, you're like, this just makes the exercises we do obsolete. Like, we're fixing mechanics by cleaning up just information. We're not lifting, we're not putting the body in position, we're not doing overload eccentrics, we're not doing anything. All we're doing is providing better information to the body.
Yeah, and to that point, when you look at like in baseball world, like biomechanic reports, right? Hey, this guy's in a certain percentile of shoulder horizontal abduction, time of the arm into acceleration, etc. It's like, well, Square1 made my ability to predict biomechanics reports a lot easier. I could do that already, but this is a way where I've had conversation with the guys in professional baseball. They're like, hey, can you look at this report and tell me what you think? It's like, well, I know what the mechanical problem could be. Let me get some context and history so I can clean up the timing without actually having to manipulate 1,000 drills and fields and all this other crap. It just makes a lot of things obsolete. The problem is, if you look at any sort of major league organization, it's like, well, we're going to take the 3 lowest hanging fruit to get the best results on most guys. It's like, well, is that really practical? It's like, well, is that going to actually increase the ROI for the entire organization for each guy? Probably not. So why are we focus on the small micro things when we can actually just look at the macro and actually fix problems and make life easier? And like what Jared said earlier, it's like, well, yeah, if you have a background in anatomy and physiology and you understand human movement, Square1 makes your ability to solve these problems 10 times easier. But at the same time, you don't have to have that knowledge to apply it. But guys who already have knowledge, it makes them elite at what they do.
And to that point as well, Sean talks a lot about this, and I was just talking to a friend about this the other day, is like Square1 doesn't replace what you're doing at all. All it's doing is making you, like the car example, it's just making everything happen faster. You don't have to stop. Like, if you love FRC, you can do FRC with Square1. If you love RPR, you can do RPR with Square1. There's nothing that I've seen that doesn't work with Square1. And all you're doing is just checking with the body to make sure that it's okay. You're checking with the brain. You're just asking it a question. Does this trigger you? Yes or no? And that's what I love about Square1 is it's binary. There's no third option. There's no maybe. It's either yes or no, trigger or safe. And I think that's why people sometimes have a hard time understanding it, because so many things in this field are so out there. There's so many different options. It could be this, it could be this, it could be this. But like Occam's razor, the simplest answer is usually the answer. Like, it's fine. It's yes or no, on or off, trigger or safe. And the sooner that people can accept that, there are tons of people out there way smarter than all of us. And it blows my mind how they're still doing the stuff that we all know doesn't stick. And it's, in my head, it's like, dude, if you knew this, dude, you would take over wherever you are. Like, there's no head strength coach in professional baseball that's doing this. There's no head strength coach in the NBA that's doing this. The Texans are the only NFL team to host a course. I don't know if they even apply it. There's no one in a position of high up in professional sports that's doing this. There are a couple guys sprinkled throughout a couple organizations a little lower down, but there's no head guy doing this. And just thinking about, what if those head guys took a chance and we're like, you know what, let's try this out. That team and that organization in terms of development would surpass all these other teams by years. I'm talking years just from taking this one thing, because now everything you're doing is actually going to stick.
I think one of the most important arguments
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Rob. One of the most important things that Square1 can give you is it can give you your time back, right? Like, I know coaches that they'll have their athletes stretch for 30 minutes every night. I mean, I knew a coach, his name's Roger Erickson. I had a conversation with him over the phone. He worked with the Baltimore Ravens back when they won the Super Bowl. He's worked with like Joe Mauer and Giannis Antetokounmpo, and he has all of his, or he passed away unfortunately. He would have all of his athletes stretch for 30 minutes to an hour every single night. And, everybody on this call understands that range of motion is just an expression, right? And so if we can get to the root cause of why some of these things are happening, we can save ourselves a lot of time. Think about the applications for a physical therapist or an AT. Like we've already talked about the endless application for sport coaches and strength coaches, but if I'm a PT or if I'm an AT, how much time am I saving my athletes by getting them back 4 weeks quicker, 6 weeks quicker than could be had by sticking to these traditional conventional timelines? I really think that the amount of time that you can save by investing in this system is a return on investment of its own. So I think that's something that needs to be considered in the industry as well.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it as like, well, people don't understand, like, hey, what kind of feedback our nervous system actually takes in. It's like something I never thought of. That's something I talked about Jared with when I was there. Is, for example, for me, like I have tons of tattoos, right? And what we don't understand is like, hey, I can trigger myself because we're talking about a ton of trauma. Like, well, I can trigger myself, and then feedback from my nervous system is not clean because it went through a ton of trauma. And I had to go through literally my entire arm and my back just to clear a lot of triggers that were associated with my tattoos by themselves. That's something we don't think about. Um, I think that I look at Square One as, hey, I'm using 20% of my brain, right, to problem solve. Well, what if I could have access to 50, 70, 90? That's a ridiculous application. But yeah, it's a limitless pill for problem solving problems, honestly. I feel like Bradley Cooper every day, like dropping a limitless pill and figuring things out.
To kind of go off of that, I want to kind of flip it just a little bit because we've been talking about all the benefits, so to speak. What are some of the things where we've kind of what are some of the challenges that people will run into with using Square One? Like are there certain cases that are either tougher, require more patience, or like a slightly different approach, or either certain situations or circumstances where Square One doesn't really work that
So
well?
there's only two things that are negatives about Square One. The first one is that people with stenosis, you just don't work on them. It's the amount of time Sean had, because my uncle has stenosis, and I asked Sean about this, and he was like, just it's not worth it, because Sean says a third of the time it's going to work, a third of the time it's going to do nothing, and a third of the time it's going to blow them up, and they're going to feel terrible. You're going to make it worse. And Sean's thinking behind that is, well, maybe they need those compensations around stenosis. The other thing is I don't even call it a negative. It's more of just practice. Is you have to know how to test. You have to know how to test, and you have to know how to cue someone for the test. Now, I know Zach worked on Austin Yoakum recently, and he was having a hard time grasping the part of the idea of testing. But I think really it's just knowing how to test and then cueing someone how to test is the only thing that's negative about Square One. It works unless they have a serious structural issue, completely torn labrum, shoulder is currently dislocated, like we're talking out of the socket. There are things where if there's a legitimate structural issue, it's not going to do a lot. But I have seen pain be reduced with a structural issue. Guys got a torn UCL. There's an example. One of the guys, he's in the Yankees org. I believe he's in the DR, who knows Square One. And he worked on a guy. I might not say this correctly, but the guy was throwing, I think, like 93, 95, touching 6 or 7. Got an MRI before the season, grade 2, torn. Worked on him almost like throughout the season. At the end of the season, redid the MRI, still torn, but had no pain, had no velocity drop off. So it didn't fix the issue. It just allowed him to complete a season. I'm not sure what happened after, if he ended up getting TJ or not, but he was able to still compete and perform his sport. So really, no stenosis, get good at testing.
I think for me, the biggest hurdle is if you have a knowledge base in anatomy and physiology, getting out of your own way. Honestly, when it comes to square one, is I've caught myself at times trying to problem solve an issue by thinking, okay, well, physiologically, where could the issue be rooted instead of getting the feedback from the nervous system and moving from there. I think that's a huge piece for guys who have that background is putting that on the back burner and just taking the information from the nervous system first. Don't try and be a hero. Don't get your ego get in the way of trying to problem solve a problem. That's something I initially when Jared was first talking about. I was like, dude, well, I can understand where the problem is, but is that actually where the problem is? I'm not listening to the nervous system. I'm trying to do my own problem solving without context. And that's the caveat for square one is if you can't change your perspective, it becomes very hard to implement. But if you can be open-minded and look at it from a bigger picture, it becomes very simple. And that's the way I kind of look at things most of the time. Yeah, do I catch myself like going on a caveat, like in my brain of thinking about, oh, hey, I can fix this issue by doing this, this, and this? For sure. But I think the ever-changing lens of perspective is a huge piece. But as we know, like when it comes to sports performance, usually that perspective lens is stuck on one level and has no ability to change. I think the best coaches in any sport have the ability to change their perspective micro to macro and back and forth, as opposed to getting stuck in one. And most of the time, people are trying to be super finite, talking about an individual joint action when we know that individual joint actions are byproducts of other ones. I mean, that's something we need to understand, and we have to look at it from a bigger picture.
Well, even too on that point, like this is to me something like FRC, like, or from that system. Well, it's just a bunch of stuff, and so like, where does one thing start and where does another thing end? So when it comes to like creating a joint action, to me, like that's the thing about square one is like the interventions are specific but not hyper specific. It's not like turn on like this little band of muscle right here. Now you could, but it's like you just hit this whole area and we don't know exactly which one, but hey, that clears up like this whole thing. And so it's not, and two, you don't know like, okay, because each joint, there's so many different muscles that can cause the joint action. Which one is the one that's causing the problem? I don't know, And so like, to me, that's where, I don't know, like, because we had mentioned just briefly a little bit about like homeopathy before we started talking. One of the things about homeopathy that was interesting to me is that they don't care so much about like, yeah, a diagnosis can be useful, but honestly, it's in homeopathy, we don't care so much like how you got to be the way you were, like what is the thing that caused you to get sick? I don't know, but here are your symptoms. Here are the things that are going on with you. All right, we treat what's going on with you and you get better. Because sometimes it's like, how are you ever going to know anyways? What was the cause of it? And so I think that's kind of the same thing too here with square one. You don't always know like, why is a person injured, hurt, whatever. I don't know. We just run the system. We ask the questions, we do the intervention and you get better.
And
to kind of go ahead.
I was thinking with that too, what's so good about square one is everything is good about square one, but essentially when you're finding issues, a lot of the times when you run the system and you keep going back to a certain area, more often than not, that certain area, they will have had a previous injury, maybe didn't disclose. There are times when, I've been working on someone and then I'll go to their hip like 15 times and they have like, I don't know, elbow pain. I'm like, have you ever had a hip injury? And they're like, no, not really. I'm like, you ever fallen it or anything? They'll be like, oh yeah, I fell off a scooter and I landed on my hip. And it's like, huh, that's weird. And I'm like, how long ago was that? There'll be 5-6 years. So like the body, like the nervous system is basically a history book. It's a history book and a map at the same time. And we can find these old things that have happened and kind of use them to tell the story. Sean likes to say he hates storytelling, but when you use square one tells you the story. We're not making up. The example I always give is you go to a PT with knee pain. The first two things they look at are hip and ankle. That's telling a story. Versus we use square one. What if the knee issue is in their fingers? What if they broke their pinky when they were 6 years old? They're now 33, and they walk and their knee hurts every time they walk. And for whatever reason, they're pinky, and then the other thing is kind of where you're at now. What's so cool about Square1 is that you can fix, like, this is like a sticky thing to lock stuff in. You can fix someone with this. All we're doing is clearing up information. A big thing with Square1 is whenever I explain to someone, I always say, I'm not trying to fix your issue. I'm just trying to increase your brain's ability to take in information. This is information to our brain. Our brain's either going to perceive it as good or bad. Now, I could touch it to my face. I could touch it different parts of my body. I could hit it with it. I could eye track with it. All it is information. Sean says that the first two triggers were fluorinated toothpaste and Nature Valley granola bars. And it's giving people a lot of pain. And why? Because it's just information. It doesn't mean there's a whole discussion about fluoride and things in food, but all it is it's just information to the body. The body doesn't know how to discern one thing from another. It's just different types of information. Like, my brain doesn't know, like, subconsciously what this is. Obviously, I know what it is. It's something you stick on to lock stuff in with. But to the brain, this is just information. Now, it can either process this information or it can't process that information. And so maybe if I do this, if I like smack someone around with this, do a bunch of different things with it, maybe that clears up the issue, maybe it doesn't. But you don't have to be specific with Square1. You're just cleaning up information. We're not trying to, like, the byproduct is getting people out of pain, improving mobility. That's the byproduct. But if we just clear up information, things tend to get better.
Yeah, because the nervous system, like, yeah, is it a supercomputer? For sure. But it's smart and stupid at the same time. It's like, hey, yeah, I had an elbow injury. Your body doesn't know that your elbow's still not hurt and that specific range of motions are okay. So it'll create compensations around that, which will inhibit the ability to work through those range of motion. So if we can't address those problems in the chain as far as neural input is concerned, it's like, well, it's never really going to change. So obviously, I've done a few tests on myself. Like, I've broken every single one of my fingers over the course of my life. I had to clear out a ton of layers in every single one of both my hands just to clear out any sort of field within there. And actually, when I left the New York seminar, and I've talked to Jared about this, it's like, I hate the smell of wintergreen. I hate it. It's miserable because I used to dip straight, man, wintergreen, and I got a bad experience with wintergreen one time. And for the fuck of it, I went to the store and got some wintergreen dip just because. I was like, you know what? I wonder if I can clear this trigger. So I sat there and literally, I hated it the entire time. It was brutal. Just sitting in front of me and I'm smelling this god awful smell of wintergreen. And I was like, you know what? Let's see if I can get through it. By 5 minutes later, I didn't even notice the smell anymore, which was very weird. And I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to put it in my mouth. Same deal. Didn't bother me at all. It was the craziest thing ever. Just opened up my ability to kind of go in different directions on what I wanted to do.
And and the thing, that's not an isolated incident. Like, Sean can tell you multiple stories. One of my favorite stories from Sean is, I believe it was his daughter had a berry allergy and fixed the berry allergy with Square1. Like Rob's saying, it's not just pain. It's not just range of motion. It's everything. It's any of your five senses can trigger you.
Yeah, I mean, even when Jared left the seminar and he had the baby with colic on the plane, it's like you're able to help someone with colic by just clearing a bunch of triggers. I do stuff with my son all the time. My son currently is like, he's a little behind when it comes to speech. And every time I go through a session with him and you see a new sound, new babble, new this, it's like, well, it's connected. So the practical applications to that side are literally endless. What if we can speed up learning development just from clearing triggers, which seems ridiculous on the surface, but at the same time, the brain controls it all. So why aren't we addressing that first?
I think it's hard for the industry to accept this fact because as humans, I think we all have this innate want or desire to understand everything that we're looking at and understand everything that we're seeing. But I think that it's a crazy world we're living in to think about the fact that Square One's doing a lot of things that we have no idea. We have no clue what Square One is doing to the fullest extent, right? I mean, we probably don't even have the ability to measure some of the things that Square One's doing. I would love to see some people take like an Omega Wave or a Thought Tech Infinity, or maybe just some device that measures brain activity. And I know, Jared, you had mentioned to me earlier that the heart rate variability on one of your athletes had improved after doing a bunch of Square One. So obviously it has something to do with it's creating a parasympathetic effect on the nervous system. Maybe it's because you're not compensating as much. Maybe that's why this increase in parasympathetic activity is happening. But you don't know what you don't measure. And over the next 10, 15, 30 years, we're going to be able to measure a lot more. And we're going to be able to see all the things that Square One is doing. And that really, really excites me. But Jared, what are maybe some other things, or Rob, what are some other things that you guys have noticed in terms of parasympathetic activity? Have people talked about feeling just more loose and more relaxed? When I was at St. John's, a bunch of guys, at least 3 of the 7 that I worked on, had said, wow, I feel so relaxed right now. My shoulders feel like they're just sitting an inch lower. Like, what are some other things that people have described to you about that?
I mean, I'm a stimulant junkie, right? I've taken way too much caffeine, take way too much Adderall. I'm a circus more often than not when it comes to sympathetic activity. And I found that over the course of time, I've been able to kind of wean off caffeine a lot easier, which seems insane because I've been drinking, I don't know, 600 and 900 milligrams of caffeine every day for like 3 decades. It's insanity. And then obviously I haven't tested anything when it comes to nicotine because I like it too much. So I don't kind of want to get rid of it. But if I can kind of tailor back when it comes to caffeine, sure. I mean, I got enough stimulants going on in the first place. But I've noticed that my resting heart rate's down,
I,
which seems crazy that I can just reset myself to a degree and make myself more in a parasympathetic state and actually see a change. Now, I probably should reactivate my Whoop membership to see where I am as far as HRV is concerned, because I probably guess it's higher for sure. Um, but even with that, it's like my resting heart rate's down, which hasn't been that case in forever, regardless if I put a ton of stimulant in my body, which is wild.
I think the most common one I've seen is sleep increase. And I worked on a kid who he was a former Marine. And I was trying to play baseball, and those guys don't sleep at all. Like terrible insomnia. I worked on him. I didn't even work on him that much. I think we only did maybe like 20 minutes. Nothing crazy. He comes in the next day and shows me his Whoop for his sleep. He would average about 4 hours of total sleep a night, maybe like 45 minutes of deep and REM, maybe. Shows me his Whoop had 10 hours of sleep, had 4.5 hours of deep and REM. And he's like, "What did you do to me?" And I was like, "It just happens sometimes. It's not uncommon. A lot of times it's not going to happen, but it does happen frequently enough that when it does happen, I can say, yeah, that tends to happen." I think sleep is the biggest one that I've seen improve. And if you think about it from a physiological and anatomical perspective, in a biological perspective, it makes sense. The body's more in a parasympathetic state. It can, release endorphins easier. You're able to fall asleep easier. It's going to decrease serotonin a little bit before bed. So it's going to have all the right mechanisms being in a parasympathetic state. But it's just crazy that, you can improve sleep just by clearing out information. I can't really think of any others off the top of my head, but sleep is the biggest one. I had HRV. That's another big one. I mean, I've seen, and even with myself, I struggle with some gut issues sometimes. I've been, obviously I've changed up my diet a little bit to help with that, and that has helped. But, I've seen my bloating go down just from clearing stuff out and, kind of doing some things that Zach knows about. And I know, Rob, you know about it too, but can't really say what those things are here. But I've been using some of those techniques, and, it's kind of insane how you can almost specify or create a profile for someone with Square1, and then kind of use things and tailor it to kind of what you're trying to do. But sleep is definitely so common.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I've had TMJ for who knows how long, right? And I did a bunch of stuff with when it comes to clearing, and I don't get jaw pain or teeth pain anymore after I sleep, which I've had forever. I grind the shit out of my teeth, but I haven't really noticed it in the last 2 months. Haven't had any problems. I'm like, this is weird. It's like, why is even same with teeth sensitivity? Like, I usually have super sensitive teeth, and I have a Zin in my face probably 20 hours a day, and I haven't had any teeth sensitivity at all, which seems ridiculous. Comes back. I actually went to the dentist the other day. So, oh, your teeth look great. Oh, nice. That's terrific. Um, but I'm still trying to do like self tests on myself and different athletes. And I think that a couple different ones with specific athletes, sleep, like Jared said, is a big one. And even the recovery aspect from session to session is a huge low hanging fruit for most guys. Obviously, Jared just remembered something.
I was gonna like the amount of recovery and the strength increases that I have seen from running Square1, not attacking strength issues, is ridiculous. I had a guy the other day. We're doing kind of our final push before the season, just trying to make sure kind of squeeze whatever we can. And dude just zerchered 5 plates, and we're not even trying to chase. Like, that's not the adaptation I want right now. I'm just trying to just running some rate coding, and it's like the amount of recovery in between sessions is insane. Like, and this kind of goes into another point of when people say, "Oh, we're training the nervous system," or we're doing these things. It's like, are you really? Everyone thinks of the nervous system as high CNS, low CNS. That's what everyone thinks of the nervous system. But that's just like the physiological expression of the nervous system. It's not the actual neurological component of it. And so if we're training the nervous system to try and fire really fast, yes, when we get into physiology, we talk about all these byproducts of all these chemical processes. It's like all that's regulated by the nervous system, how fast we can clean that out of our system. It's all regulated by the nervous system. And so if we can improve our recovery from training session to training session, if we're running a 3-4 week block, we might be able to run 4 days a week versus 3, because the athlete, might be able to recover faster. So we're now getting a whole extra day of training that would normally be a quote unquote recovery day, because we're just improving information. We're just getting the brain's ability to recover the body better. And that byproduct is not even due to quote unquote recovery triggers. It's just due to improving just information. And I think that's a huge thing that I know Rob just talked about, but being able to recover is everything. Sleep, like that's how we recover. Like if we can improve our recovery, we've now improved everything.
I've heard anecdotes from coaches, Mike Ryan, who's the one that hosted my conference in South Dakota. He goes by Second Chance Movement on Instagram. He's done experiments with vertical jump, and not just even from a session to session basis, but even intra workout, like doing Square1 on yourself in a workout, and you're able to repeat bouts over and over and over again. What does that do from an auto-regulatory standpoint? Like, are you able to do more reps in your session? Well, then you're going to have a better opportunity to PR if you can do more reps in your session. And it's not even from a work capacity basis, it's from an efficiency, a neurological efficiency basis. If your nervous system is more efficient, maybe you can repeat more bouts in your session. And then from a session to session basis, if you can repeat higher intensity bouts over a longer period of time, does that do more for your adaptations in your program? I would think so. And that's going to be something that Jared and I will probably do a lot of studies on in the near future here. But I mean, those things, those two things alone should implore any coach to explore this system.
I think too, if you, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, if you're on the fence about Square1, like, you just have to take it. Like, Rob is the most contrarian person probably I've ever met, and for him to go in to Square1 saying this is literally said, this is stupid, but I'm going to try it out anyway. And for someone like him to basically flip his whole world upside down and be like, hey man, everything you're doing is not wrong, but it's not complete. And to just change your whole thought process, like for someone like that to have this experience to it, you're just kind of just stupid, honestly, if you don't take it. At least just try it, or just get worked up by someone, because like it's going to blow your mind.
Yeah, something I noticed and I just thought about is since I'm hyper ADD, ADHD, and I have a really difficult time sitting down and focusing on something, one of the biggest changes I've seen is I can actually regulate focus periods, which I've never been able to do ever without drugs or anything else. It's just not something I was able to do. And now I can, I did it last night. I didn't sleep a wink, but I worked all night. But like I found myself like drifting off, like looking at a different thing and getting caught up on Instagram or social media. And then I would reset myself and I'm back on track and focused, which again, practical applications, just like Sarah said, I thought it was a load of crap. I would never even consider it. I'd be like, dude, this is ridiculous. And like you said, it's like, hey, I was willing to take the plunge into something that seemed like absolute black magic, and roll with it. I mean, if you're on the and I've talked to coach before, hey, is it worth it? It's like, well, it's probably the most impactful thing I've ever done, and I've done a lot, which it says a lot. It's an absolute game changer, and I can't recommend it enough to anybody.
What would you say to, I want to say like your sports medicine type staff? I feel like they're the hardest to really get to, partially because of the things that you kind of mentioned before, Rob, of like, they work in the way that they've been trained to think about things, kind of, they're already telling a story as soon as they see something. And, I know the last conversation I had with somebody was like, well, I feel like I can just address that issue with the things that I have, the tools that I already have. And so I guess, how do you start? Because like, I think we did a demo for them and they just thought the whole thing was an assessment. They're like, that's a really cool assessment. It's like, no, we're past that stage of like trying to figure out which muscle test we're using. And like, he's running the system now. And I still, I was talking to our head coach. I'm like, look, I can understand like you not seeing like this, like the value in this. I mean, cause you're just looking at it and you're like, I don't know what's going on. So like, I guess for me, it's like, how do you help? Especially, I see like going back to like what you're talking about, Jared. To me, the person that in my mind would have the biggest impact, and I understand why you bring up like, well, an S&C coach, because they're S&C coaches don't have, they haven't been inundated with like the sports med way of thinking, so they're a little bit more open minded to this. But to me, really, like if you put this in the hands of a sports med person, like what could that do to change to keep guys healthy? I mean, for how many organizations, how many guys? Well, also too, I mean, you just think of the number of dollars that are sitting on the sidelines. I mean, if you can keep that money actually healthy and productive. I mean, I just think of where I'm at locally, the Twins. I mean, you got multiple guys that they can't keep on the field who could be really good if they're healthy. So I guess What is your guys' thoughts on like, how do you talk to sports med people? Because I feel like that's like, if you can kind of crack that nut, like, I mean, you're off to the races as far as like helping people.
I would say it's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah, I agree.
So obviously look at it from like a orthopedic standpoint or anyone in sports medicine is number one, a lot of them are handicapped by health insurance, okay, what they can and can't do. So it's difficult to kind of get them to bridge off into something that's as quote unquote woo woo as this because there's no code you can put in an invoice to do something like this, right? And I think that the people that have more so adopted
Just call it isometric exercise. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like,
I would say like
just code it as like your general exercise. I don't know.
like chiropractors are going to be more susceptible because they can kind of play outside the lines a little bit. But I think for orthopedics and physical therapists, it's going to be a lot longer of a process because it seems too simple and it goes against the entire model in itself. Because then it seems like, well, I just spent the better part of 10 years of my life learning something that the whole system can be derailed by central nervous system feedback and intervention.
I think the best way to go about it is how Sean does it. When you first go to the course, or he's going to show you, he's basically going to have someone lie down on the table and he's going to turn their legs in. And 95% of the time, the right leg's not going to turn in. And then he just poses the question, all right, how would you fix this? And at my Square1 course, it was great because they had a bunch of people trying because I was one on the table. They tried to fix my right leg turning in, and they'd fix it, and I'd get up, and I'd take a step, and I'd lay back down, leg wouldn't turn in again. And I think and then obviously they ran Square1, and then it worked. And I think the beauty in that is that I think the way to do it is to teach them to think of what they see as an expression and not the issue. I think when you get their mindset out of, oh, right leg not turning into, what does that mean? It means they're lacking right IR. Why are they lacking that? Is it adductor? Is it TFL? Is it, what is it? Is it ankle mobility? That they're thinking that the right leg not turning in is a mobility limitation. And we have to communicate to them that, no, this is just a faulty expression of the nervous system. Like that's how I view mobility range of motion now. It's not an issue. It's just the body this is the result of faulty inputs to the nervous system. And so I think showing them the leg not turning in is fantastic because the best part about it is you can have them do whatever they want. They can do acupuncture. They can do dry needling. They can do EMS stimulation. They can do whatever they want and they're going to turn in. And it's like, great. Now have them walk. We all walk. We all sit. We all stand. We all brush our teeth. Have them do something that involves their everyday life and then see what happens. And I'm going to tell you right now, 100% of the time, it's not going to stick. It's just not. Every single time, it's not going to stick. Now, you can still do that and use Square1, then it will stick. But just showing them that our lives are not just laying down on a table, getting assessed and getting worked on. We're dynamic human beings, which is why with Square1, so many times I've run into this. I have to remind myself that we're dynamic human beings. Like I'll test someone and, they'll fail. And then all of a sudden I'll get distracted. I'll retest them and then it's fine. And it's because we're all dynamic. They're going to compensate around that. We're all dynamic human beings. We're all constantly interacting with our environment at every single point in time. And so that's why things are going to be different. And I think that's also what gets some people frustrated about Square1 is that they have to understand that we're always interacting with our environment. And we're not just this piece of flesh that just is there existing. Like we do things, we move, we breathe, we a breeze can trigger your nervous system. There's just so much that goes on there, and just getting PTs, orthopedics out of this thought process of I see issue, I have to identify this issue, rather than going, I see something's going on. Okay, what if this is a faulty expression of something? And you can check it. Now you can run, I haven't seen this happen, but maybe if the right leg doesn't turn in after you've cleared it, maybe there is some structural limitation. Maybe they have something wrong in their actual hip socket. Maybe, I don't know, they have something going on there. Then it's okay, now we need to actually go in and see what's going on physically. Like, what is going on? But if it turns in, that expression is now cleared. So I think just getting them out of this idea of, I see issue, that's the issue. It's like, no, it's just an expression.
Yeah. I mean, the other hurdle that most of the industry doesn't really talk about is money. Money's a big piece. Like physical therapists, orthopedists, chiropractors, they charge by the session, right? We'll call a spade here, right? I know that this is a very sensitive topic, but it's one that needs to be talked about. I mean, if I can fix someone in a couple sessions, like 2 sessions, as opposed to having them coming back 2 or 3 times a week for a month, there's a financial component there, right? So the adoption of something like this is going to be a lot more long term because of the financial impact it could have on the industry as a whole, without a question. I mean, people got to make a living. So if I find a tool that can fix people a lot quicker, then I don't have repeat customers. That's like, oh shit, well, now I'm hurting myself financially, but now I got to find more, I got to spend more money on marketing. I got to get more people in here for this and that and the other. But at the same time, like, I look at it as like, hey, if I can get you out of pain and rolling in a session or 2, I did my job. Let's go help somebody else. But the whole industry doesn't look at it that way. And it's going to be a really difficult situation to get them out of that.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on one thing that Jared had said, though. Our CNS is being constantly influenced. And so what's important to remember, too, is that this is why some of the other stuff still works. Because of the fact that, a breeze might trigger you. Well, at the same point, a breeze actually might make your reset your nervous system and make your nervous system feel stimulate it in a positive way. And so I think that's where the same thing of doing exploratory movements, rock climbing trees, all this sort of stuff, doing flows, different, whatever it is, all these things can actually eventually, you could hit one of the things that, you need to clear out by doing that. But to me, Square1 is a little bit more streamlined in the fact that okay, instead of, you having to move around for 15, 20 minutes just to find one thing and to clear one thing out, well, then maybe we can get that done in, a fraction of the time. And then we can move on to the next thing. And so I think for me, that's where, yes, all these other things can work, but you're kind of just taking a shot in the dark a little bit when it comes to doing it that way. So go ahead, Jared.
Oh, I was just going to say, when you're clearing something too, I talk about, okay, we're taking 15 minutes to find one thing. Even if you're not proficient at Square1, you can clear one layer in a minute. Even if you're not proficient, that's 15 layers in a minute. If you're proficient at it, I can probably do a layer in probably 5 seconds, but that's just a lot of practice and a lot of just repetitions doing it. But when talking about reducing time, if I get an hour with someone, I'm probably doing a couple hundred layers, and the odds of us seeing some kind of change in that time frame is huge. And now I've just done things that are taking you weeks. And kind of Rob's point in multiple sessions, that's a whole other discussion of, okay, well, why are they even in this? Are they in this to make money, or are they in this to actually help people? Because if you're actually interested in helping people, you're going to take this, you're going to run with it. Because if I want you to actually feel better, I'm going to see you once for 1 week, have you come back in 2 weeks, see you again, and then you're probably good. I don't have to see you again. And that's because we all care about actually helping the individual versus just trying to put money in our pockets. And even at that point too, you're going to get more people to come to you. If I go to see someone and I go tell someone, dude, you're not going to believe this. I was there for 45 minutes and my pain is gone and it's been gone for 2 months. You got to go see this person. Word starts to spread. And now, yes, you don't have returning clients, but you got new clients coming all the time. So there's still ways around it, but they don't think like that. They need the person coming in 2 or 3 times a week for multiple weeks and just doing stuff to temporarily make them feel better on a table. And then like that stuff still works, like PTs there's a reason why PTs are a thing. They still get people better, people get healthy, but now it can just be faster and cost them less money.
One of the other things that I see as potentially challenging for somebody like an athletic trainer who, they're at a small school, they're one person for, I don't know, like a couple hundred athletes. How does Square One get worked into that environment? I haven't quite figured out, like, because you can't spending an hour with one athlete when you have like five or six other athletes in your training room. Like, how do you deal with that? I guess my question.
So I was going to say that there is a way to do that.
Okay, as long as there is,
there is I can't really tell, there is a way to do that. But that is it. I hope it comes out one day on kind of how that works and why it does, because if we could technically fix 20 people at the same time, or as many as you want, pretty much. But you could if I was working in that scenario and I wasn't able to use this thing, but still use Square One, just not this advanced version of it, I would just teach them all how to reset and clear themselves. So this way, I could spend 5-10 minutes with one and then be like, hey, here's what you need to do. Here's what we found, go ahead and do this. Or every time you swing a bat, throw a ball, you shoot a jump shot, whatever it is, do this. And I think that's going to work really well at that small school environment, is teaching the athletes how to reset themselves.
And for clarity, you don't have to spend an hour with each guy. So it could be 10 minutes, right? And I think that's something that people are also skeptical about. It's like, oh, you did that in 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Well, what? That was way too fast. There's no way that works. Which is usually the reaction. It's like, well, you just spent 10 minutes with me and I saw a huge improvement. Like the concept of times, like that stuff takes forever to do. That takes an hour. That takes 3 sessions. That takes 8 sessions. That takes this. Like it doesn't have to be that streamlined. Once you get good at it, and I think that's the practical application part, streamlines it. So if you can go from doing one layer or every 10 seconds, 20 seconds to doing 5, 6, 7, now we're cutting that time down in a quarter. That way we can apply it in that scenario, but it takes practical application and buy-in. If you don't practice, if you don't get good at testing, if you don't kind of go all in with it, you're really not going to get any better.
And
I think
the reason. Sorry, go ahead.
The thing is that with the testing is probably going to be the hardest part for anybody learning the system. You have to get good at muscle testing. That's pretty much just a given. You really have to spend the time, put in the time equity up front to get good at the testing. But I think, you don't even really need the testing. I mean, if you have, like St. John's, for example, is a great example for this, because there are 200 plus guys on this football team. You're not going to be able to test all those 200 guys, but you could use the comprehensive isometric series. You could use Signal 6. You could use the level 1 resets and intertwine that with your training, because your training is going to bring about natural triggers, right? Like a squat, like a split squat, a bench press, a pull up, a row, all these different movements could trigger the nervous system. If you don't want to test them, you could just show them the resets if you took the course and integrating that with your training. You could do range of motion assessments before you even start doing any interventions, and then check 2-3 months later. And just by doing these random resets, intertwining them with your training, I bet you if you had them do no other stretching, no other modalities to try to improve their range of motion, I bet you would see crazy changes just by intertwining the resets into your training. That's the practical application that Sean had given me at the course. And I had tried it this summer with a few of my athletes, and all of their range of motion improved, and I didn't muscle test them once. So that's, if you're not interested in muscle testing, Square One still has a place for you. Don't let it be a barrier for you. Don't let it be a hurdle. This could be intertwined with anything, with anybody's system. It doesn't matter if you're a manual therapist, if you're a chiro, if you're a PT, if you're a strength coach. This has a place for everybody. It has an application for everybody. Even if you don't want to spend the time doing muscle testing, if you do spend the time doing muscle testing, you're going to get better and you're going to be able to create the craziest, the best results. But again, if you don't want to do that, there's still a place for you. There's still an application.
I mean, don't get me wrong. When you go through these self resets, you look like a crazy person, 100%, when you're doing these specific self resets, and then obviously some of the other stuff that Jared and is familiar with that we can't really speak on. That's a whole other conversation. But with the self resets, yeah, you look like an absolute insane person. But you see major changes all the time. And people look at me all the time and when I'm at work and they're like, dude, why are you sniffing? What are you doing? That's weird. Just stop. I'm like, no, I'm not going to stop because it actually works. And whenever I tell anybody about, if I tell an athlete or somebody else and give them these small tools, they're like, that seems insane. That's not a thing. That can't be that simple. I was like, well, it really is. And I think the simplicity of it really freaks people out, and they become even more skeptical when you make it that dumbed down.
I think to that point too is a lot of people, and I run into this, really some people that don't accept it, is they want to understand everything about it. And they'd be like, oh, it's too simple. Explain to me why it works. Explain to me, like, well, I can just show you and I can repeat this process over and over and over again. Like, I don't have to study neurology, in order to understand this. I don't have to get a doctorate in neuroscience. I can tell you, I can show you how it works. I can basically tell you what's going to happen with each step in it. But the people that don't accept it, I think, are also the ones, that are stuck. Besides being stuck in their way of thinking, they need to know the intricate science behind, what a clear is. Why is the nervous system triggered? And it's like, I mean, that stuff's cool, but it doesn't matter, like what, like I'm not going to explain to an athlete how muscle spindles work because I need you, and why I'm going to have you squat in a certain way because I need to elicit a certain change. I'm not going to basically, if I'm going to give someone a water bag, I'm not going to explain to them, yeah, I need your guts to move in a certain direction in order to get you out of this position, this orientation you're stuck in. I don't need to explain that to them. They just want to see it work. And so even with other coaches too, a lot of them are like, oh, well, I need to know why it works. It's like, all right, then tell me why every single exercise in your program is anatomically or biomechanically the best way, and explain to me how each joint action in that specific movement is going to work with your athletes. It's like, well, some of them can, but it's also like, dude, I'm not going to take the time to explain to you why a row is going to help. Like, I've never had an athlete ask me, why am I rowing? It's like, it's pointless. There's so many, like, if you want to do that, go be a professor, go actually teach in a collegiate setting. And, then you can explain, energy systems, you can explain all this other stuff. But like, if you want to actually help people, learn the system and apply it. Like, there's no reason to try and like poke holes in it because you can't explain the science behind it. It's, like it just doesn't make sense to me that, like, it's an example of like riding a bike. It's like, all of us can ride a bike. All right, can you tell me the physics of how a bike works? I can't, but I know how to ride a bike, and I can teach someone how to ride a bike. So it doesn't matter that I don't know that literally neuroscience part of it, but I can fix you, and I can do it over and over and over and over again, and I can tell you exactly what's going to happen. And so a lot of those people who are, orthos or, a higher education, it's tough for them to grasp it because they're so used to reading studies and understanding the mechanisms behind it. And then something comes along that you don't even know the mechanism behind it. And it's like, yeah, and it's like, so what? It works. It's repeatable. Like, why do you care? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me.
I think research is always going to lag behind practice and practical application, and Square1 is the epitome of that. Like we don't have all the research, we don't have all the tests, but we have the anecdotes from all the coaches that have taken the system. And every failure I have had with Square1 is, it comes down to two things. It comes down to my own personal blunders when it comes to testing or triggering or whatever that might be. And the other one would be time. Like maybe I didn't have enough time with this person. If I only had 15 minutes with them and I was able to clear 15 layers, 20 layers, maybe that wasn't enough for them. Because like you said with Rob, like you did 2 layers with Rob and his range of motion improved significantly. But there could be another person where you clear 100 layers and you don't see much of a change at all. I mean, that's rare, but it could happen. So I think that's just another thing. Like, over time, there's going to be more people looking into this system. There's going to be more people using advanced technology to measure all the things that we don't know about, or all the things we don't know Square1 can do yet. And once that happens, I do see the people that need the more objective approach to it. Those people will hop in once they see all the crazy results and the data behind it, if they need that to hop in.
And with anecdote too, it's like, I think there are some like a couple, I think it's almost like 1,000 people that have taken Square1. And it's like, how are you going to convince hundreds of people, like our 100 people just lying just to like make stuff up? Like, I have no gain from like if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, like if like, I'm not going to, like Sean has told me, like Sean lost a job over Square1. Some other person lost a job over Square1. I got in a little trouble with Square1, like using it, because it's just that good. And I'm going to use what the best thing is out there to get my athletes better. And like, if I'm not going to defend something that doesn't work, that's just like, it just doesn't make sense. And so like it just works. It just works, and it works better than anything else out there. And if there is, like Zach said, if there is something better out there, I'm doing that, and I'm leaving Square1 behind. But until that happens, and if that happens, I'm using Square1 until the end of time.
And two, on the point of like the science and whatever, is when it comes to practical application, you have to read between the lines. Like science, it does something in such a, like it looks at something in such a narrow setting that oftentimes it doesn't actually describe the whole of whatever it is that you're trying to do. Like you have to read between the lines, and then you have to bring and try to connect a whole bunch of stuff together of the science, and there's these gaps between the science. And so like to me, that's where it's like, I mean, even when it comes to PT, I mean, the science on PT is like, well, it's slightly better than rest. Like the outcomes are almost fairly close. I can't remember exactly, but I mean, that's from what I remember. The science on it is like, doing some sort of like movement exercise, which I think is probably better. We could all say is better than sitting and doing nothing. But some of the things, like when it comes to chronic back pain, you don't get that many. The results don't seem to change that much between those two. Where are you gonna go on, Rob?
That's hard to do, right? Being able to change your perspective is really difficult to do. And that's something that a lot of coaches struggle with, because I see the science, I read the study, I understand how something functions. It's hard to see past that. Same thing when it goes to like biomechanical reports and mechanical intervention. It's not black and white. Problem is, everyone thinks it's black and white. It ain't. It just won't be. It's like, your torso rotational velocity versus pelvis rotational velocity is this, and this, but like there's a byproduct to everything. So why are we getting caught up in the small details when we can make an impact by actually seeing the big picture? And I found that talking to coaches and other people, it's extremely difficult to change perspective. It's very difficult to have an ever-changing perspective to see macro and micro at the same time. Some people are caught either one or the other. And that's what I thought about Emergence when Tanner started doing it. It's like, to be completely honest, I thought it was a load of shit. And I told him straight out, I was like, dude, this is a load of bullshit. It's like, this is very elementary in nature. It's like, I don't know. I don't see it. And then come to find out, it's like, yeah, it's on the right track without a question. It's like it makes an impact in a big way. Now, obviously, Square1 works with everything. So I think that implementing Square1 with something like that can make a huge change without a question. And that's where like people get caught up in the small details and they let personal bias drive a conversation or a thought process. And then you miss the boat. It's like if I think that everything has to do with positions at front foot strike, I'm not going to think outside the box and try something else. I just won't. But if I can look at it from different perspectives and be able to have it ever changing, it just opens up possibility. But it's really, really difficult to do that. And that's what I talk to coaches all the time about. It's like it's really hard to see the connections without actually like laying it all out. But if you can see the connections, you can see how things work with one another, it becomes really simple to problem solve. Problem solving is an art. It's a skill that has to be worked on constantly. But the problem is no one wants to do that work. So, but with Square1, we can help you do that a lot faster than you normally would. So why wouldn't you want to do that?
Right. I mean, even too, like, I mean, you brought up like ecological dynamics. I mean, because Jared already brought it up. We're a dynamic system, right? And like the everything that's going on with us in our nervous system, like, is complex. Like, and so to me, like, if you understand basic things about like dynamic systems theory and complexity theory of like, okay, sometimes a small input can have an outsized effect, and like that's kind of where, again, you know, sometimes we can chase rabbits essentially when it comes to, all right, I'm going to focus on the hip, I'm going to strengthen your hip, or I'm going to give you more hip mobility because you got pain at the knee or at the whatever, and then you spend all this time trying to put all this input in here, and yet it has something to do with something else. And that to me is the non-linearity of like how our system is. And you need a system that doesn't approach the human body and you could say the nervous system in a linear fashion. And so I think for me, that's where, you know, going back to what we've talked about before of like, you kind of have to take, in some ways, for me, what helped FRC actually helped me understand Square1 and that it wasn't BS. Because what Spina was talking about is like, look, in order to gain range of motion or whatever, you actually have to have an active input, meaning like some sort of active contraction going on. And you look at what is the intervention for Square1, it's actually the kind of the same intervention that FRC uses, which is an isometric. I mean, and so when you're like, oh, okay, so if that's like it checks actually like a lot of the boxes that FRC has for like what you need to have to cause a change. And so you're like, all right, so this is just a different system, but all the mechanics here are all the same. And so for me, that's where I was like, you can explain this stuff scientifically if you have the scientific background to understand what's going on. Yes, you can explain it. But for a lot of us, we don't have that same background of like, and looking at principles, like, okay, what are these types of principles, and thinking about it in a principled way. Because again, for me, like, I'm approaching this in the way that I look at Square1 is from an ecological lens. And so how I'm thinking about it is not necessarily from an information processing, which is kind of how Sean kind of views it from a Square1 perspective, and how he describes it is more from an information processing perspective. But that doesn't mean that you can't explain and understand it from another perspective as well. And so to me, what was it? I think Mike T. Nelson, who is a PhD strength coach up here in Minnesota, he was telling me like a good strength of an idea or a concept is that it works across disciplines. And it is true across disciplines. And so, you know, when we're talking about, you know, Square1, well, it's hitting the CNS, the nervous system, and that is a multidisciplinary like field. And so do these things work, and the theories work across disciplines? And so to me, that when I started thinking about it and I start looking at this, it absolutely does. And so at least for me, that's where I feel like Square1 passes a lot of different tests. You know, I think the thing that most people are looking for is like, man, what you're saying sounds like man, it should be an instant success all the time, and you have 100% success rate. And it's like, well, no, not in the way that people think. It's not. This isn't a silver bullet. We don't just like sprinkle Square1 on somebody, and all of a sudden, like, we're curing cancer, and like the world's problems are automatically fixed. Type of a thing. Do we have some good results? Do we get consistent results? And you have to compare it to what is the current model and the results and the percentage outcomes that the standard model, like, because to me, at the end of the day, you want to compare, okay, what's my current output, of results? And if I add this other thing, does it change it? Does it make it go up or down? Am I getting is the rate at which people are getting better and the success rate that I have? Because I mean, this is the thing, right? Everybody comes to us for performance training. Well, what percentage of guys actually go on to have success at their given sport in their next season? And it's not 100% for anybody. And so to think that Square1 is going, you're going to come and use this, and all of a sudden your success rate goes to 100. I mean, I don't think that's realistic. So I think you just have to compare it of like, okay, the amount of success I was getting before, I have like, I don't know, because I think if we're being like brutally honest, it's probably in like the 20 to 30%, guys are going out and having like really good success on the field. Okay, can I bump that to like 35, 40, whatever it is? It's probably going to be something smaller. It's more incremental because, again, like, we're dealing with a complex system that's dynamic. And so, like, to think that all this stuff is going to transfer 100% right away and like instantaneous, yeah, I mean, it could happen in 30 seconds or whatever, a couple minutes for one guy, but that's not going to be the case for most guys. It might be multiple things. Could take a couple hours, whatever it is, in multiple sessions, in order for somebody to see results.
I think
to your
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say.
I mean, to your point is, it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to have a background, because I pose a question to athletes at times: is, hey, if you're going to flex your bicep, what's actually the input there? Like, what's flexing your bicep? And they're like, well, the bicep. It's like, is it now? It's like, really? Or is your brain controlling your bicep, or the muscle action, or the joint action? Put your arm overhead. What's actually controlling your ability to put your arm overhead? So, like, well, it's central nervous system feedback to elicit a movement. So why wouldn't we train the brain to do something different? They're like, oh, well, that how do you train the brain? Well, believe it or not, you can. How do you train the nervous system? Yeah, you can.
I think too, Garrett, to your point, how Sean describes Square1 is, it's not some, like, incredible like thing. I mean, it is incredible, but how he describes it is, it doesn't do everything, but for what it does, it's perfect. And what it does is clear up information. That's what it does. And whatever happens after that happens. But we don't have any control of the expression. We just control the input.
One of the other things too, like, I don't think it's just the brain that controls like our muscle actions, right? We have our Golgi tendons, we have like reflexes, like, because this is the other thing is like the whole the knowledge, like, and this is where for me ecological dynamics is helpful, because it looks at the system as like holistic, like you're you're an embodied being, and so like your mind and your cognition is not just in your brain, it is distributed out through your whole body. And so there are other things too, of like, not all the information, because it can take too long, needs to go all the way back up to your brain in order for it to like send a signal back down, right? That's why we have some of the reflexes, like Zach, you were playing with one in the foot, right? Like, there's a reflex in your foot, so that why? Because why do we need to send all the information all the way back up to the brain and have the brain go, oh yeah, curl the toes, and send it all the way back down? Versus if you hit a certain reflex, when we go to hit the ground, okay, we're just naturally going to curl, or to have a certain reflex of like, okay, I touch something hot, boom, I'm going to pull my hand away. Because again, if I have to wait till the brain registers hot, move my hand, you're going to get way more burned, rather than you have something that's local that goes, we hit a threshold, we're automatically going to like quick move our hand back. And then we'll go figure out like, okay, was that the right move after the fact? And so I think there's the nervous system and why we move sometimes is more, it's a little bit, it's not just, everything's not just brain centric, I think. Especially even when we're talking about the nervous system. And so that for me is where I think it's fun to like, okay, we have a system that works. Now coming up with like the explanations, that's, you can do that a little bit more ad hoc and start to try to test it and whatever and figure out, okay, what is the reality behind this? But anyways, I just wanted to at least go on that little side rant there for a second. Well, I think this might be a good spot to land the plane. Where can people find you guys if they want to learn more about what you're up to and follow along with what you guys are doing?
I'm on Twitter. Just at I am underscore. Let me check. I am underscore Slater R with extra R at the end of it. I don't know. I might change it. I might not. But I am underscore Slater R. You can find me there. I'd also just say follow Square1. They're on Instagram and Twitter at Square1 System. Reach out to Sean. He will respond. Like, I promise you, he will respond. If you have any questions about it, he's more than happy to talk about it. I'd say obviously follow us, but really follow Sean, because if you really want to learn about it, watch the stuff he puts out, DM him, ask him questions, and he'll be more than happy to answer.
Did he fix his Twitter yet?
No, so he lost the password for it, and he's locked. I know he's locked out of it. I told him he's got to get on it, but he's locked out of it.
Dude.
He can't get on it. I know. He might have to make a new one.
Well, he's got to do something, because he's missing an entire boat for not doing that.
Oh yeah.
Zach, are you still there? Do you want to shout out where people can find you?
Oh yeah, I'm at Jungels
Zach was
underscore
frozen.
SP.
Oh, wait, there you are. Cool.
JUNGELS underscore SP on Instagram.
Well, hope you guys enjoyed today's podcast. Until next time.